Today I want to discuss a bunch of different things that service dogs can do, all the different categories and different tasks and things that service animals might be able to perform for a bunch of different disabilities. This is not an all-inclusive list. There are more and more every single day, but these are just a bunch of bigger categories and just a little bit about each one. The oldest known service animal is the guide dog. So it's what a lot of people are most familiar with, and those are for blind, low vision people, to help guide around obstacles and find navigation. I did a full video on that earlier. Then there's mobility service animals. So these are kind of two broad categories. So there's mobility dogs for wheelchair users and then ones for non-wheelchair users. So those are just kind of broad classifications. So the ones for the wheelchair users, if they're not wearing, typically the ones for the wheelchair user will not wear a mobility harness because they don't really need to, because the wheelchair is already doing the mobility for the human. So these dogs will do things typically like pushing buttons, helping open doors. They can tug on something that you can attach a little hook to the door and they can pull it open for you. They can pull the wheelchair for you, different things like that. So if they pull the wheelchair, they would be wearing a harness, but it doesn't have a handle on top. So if the person is not a wheelchair user or is not always a wheelchair user, they might also do things like balance, assistance with a handle, forward momentum, things like that. And they still might also do things like picking up dropped objects, helping you open cabinets or drawers, opening and closing, helping with heavier doors, things like that. So there's a lot of overlap, but some key little points that are different. So that's the mobility. So we've got guide and mobility. Then the next broad category is the medical alert dogs. So this can include a ton of different things. So I'd say that probably the most common in this category is the diabetic alert dogs, and they can detect, typically they're trained to your saliva, so they'll take samples of you whenever you're at what you consider high and what you consider low, and they'll train the dog to detect those different things and give you some sort of alert to let you know on either end. Or some of them, they just kind of give you one alert and then you have to check it yourself. So in general, that's what the diabetic alert dogs will do. They just tell you when you're outside of your healthy range. Then there's the seizure alert dogs or seizure response. So seizures are one of those things that you can't train the dog to alert to. So it's just a natural alert. So that means that you just train the dog everything else that they need to know, and then hopefully if you regularly have seizures, you'll start picking up on weird behaviors they did beforehand, and then you can shape those like weird behaviors into an actual alert to your issue. But if they never start doing those weird behaviors, they may not be detecting it, or they may just not know what to do with that information. So then in that case you would teach them a response. So the alert is what happens beforehand, response is afterwards. So you could teach them to like get underneath your legs or underneath your head, or to roll you onto your side, or whatever you need for them to do, maybe going and getting help. There's a call button that you can teach them to press this button that you set a phone number beforehand, so pushing the button will activate the rescue phone, I think it's called. Anyway, so it'll call predetermined person, which could be another family member, or it can be 911, whatever you need for your disability. So that's the response. So they don't have to be detecting it to be the response. So those are both things related to seizures, and for a lot of other illnesses as well. You can train the alert or you can train a response to the same condition. So then we have cardiac alert, which is what I'm going to be getting. That's also an untrained one. They will alert to changes in the chemistry of your body. Still not fully understood yet exactly what's happening or what they're alerting to, but it's been shown to consistently be accurate. So it's, I think the oldest, the first cardiac alert dog was Adele, and that was about 15 years ago. So it's still really, really new, that whole program. So that's cardiac alert. There's also a bunch of other conditions. I know there's some service dogs that alert to things like migraines. You have a visual disturbance issue, you lose your vision right before you have a migraine. This could be really dangerous if you were, say, in the car and driving and suddenly you lose your vision. So having that early alert is really valuable in those cases. Another category is the allergen detection dogs. So for people who have severe allergies that even contact with that could be anaphylaxis for them, the dog can detect it. Typically they do kind of two separate things for that. They will detect it in the environment, so you could have them come in and scan a room and just say like, okay, I'm getting ready to be in this room. Can you tell me, is there any peanut residue in this room? So the dog will go around, and then if they smell something, they'll alert on it, and then somebody can clean that area, and then they'll run the dog by again. It's clean, so I know I'm safe in this room for as long as I'm going to be in here. The other thing they'll do is in food, you could have them detect it. So I have this box of crackers and I want to quickly know, without reading the ingredients, or if there's contamination in there, I could offer the box to the dog, ask them check, then they'll give me whatever signal. So some of them it's sit for safe, or like paw for bad. So you could do that with things that you know. A lot of times they'll check with things that you can read the ingredients and go, okay, you were accurate on this one. And then if you're ever exposed to something like school lunches or something like that, where you think it's safe, but you really need to check if it's been exposed to something, then they can have the dog check that food and tell if it's safe. So that's a whole bunch of different allergens, and that's generally what they do. The next category is the hearing detection dogs, and these are most commonly used at home. So typically the handler will be deaf, and a lot of times with deafness comes some anxiety of just not feeling comfortable being alone at home, because you wouldn't be able to hear if somebody were breaking in, if somebody's knocking at the door, if there's just a lot of sounds that you wouldn't be aware of, and it can cause anxiety and just in general feeling pretty isolated. So the things that they're typically trained is leading you to a sound or a specific response in response to a sound. So leading you to any sound, if there's any sort of loud noise, they can be trained to take you to it. They'll come get you, give you whatever signal they do to say, I've heard something, let's go investigate it, and lead you to it. If, say, they're leading you to the basement or something and you don't think there should have been a loud noise from down there, you might just be able to go, okay, something has happened, I need to go ahead and call somebody and have somebody check it out for me. Whatever it is, it's kind of like letting them be your ears and know that if something's happening or it's not. The other thing is for things like alarms. They can be trained to actually bring you to the phone, to the alarm, to the door if the doorbell's rung, to the door if there's a knock, those kind of things. Or bring the phone that the alarm is going off and they bring it to you. So this can be different ways to kind of help you be able to manage with the sound issues. So just those kind of basic things, but a lot of those are within the home. So many of these service dogs don't need to go out into public because there's a lot of other accommodations that work pretty well out in public. So they can go out in public, but a lot of times what they do doesn't really make sense for public access. So that's another piece of information for that as well. So the last major category is psychiatric service dogs, and these make up a really large number, and it's growing pretty much every day. with psychiatric service dogs, or dogs that are dual trained in psychiatric work and another disability. PTSD, depression, anxiety, and autism is another really common one to have service dogs for. Typically, the autism service dogs I see are for children, but there's a growing need for adult autism service dogs as well. So in general, there's a bunch of different things that can be trained for these dogs, but I'm going to give a few little pieces of things that can be trained, and they kind of mix and match with each disability because there's so many different psychiatric disabilities. So one of the most common is deep pressure therapy, which can be trained on any part of the body, and it will allow you to, it's kind of like a weighted blanket or a heating pad or something like that that can provide a soothing relief. And this is just, it's not just snuggling your dog, because that's not a task, that's not trained. It's a very specific type of thing. So for her, one of the things she does is get on my chest, and she'll lick my face as a way to manage pain. And she'll also sometimes lay, if I have a bunch of different commands for her for where I want her, she'll lay on my hips and things like that. So that's one of the most common tasks. There's also things for like PTSD. You can be guided away from something that's stressful for you, or they can help you find an exit. A lot of times people with severe anxiety about something like that, or PTSD, if they've become triggered by something, then it's just this overwhelming need to get away, but also sometimes an inability to really understand where they are and where the exit is and where they're going, or like how to get out. If there's a crowd, just feeling trapped. So the dog can be trained to find an exit and just guide you there. Even if you are able to see visual, like your vision is okay, you may not be able to guide yourself. So there's that. And then there's also things like block and cover. So that's like where they provide a perimeter for you. So they might stand in front of you, they might stand behind you, or they might circle around you, keeping people from touching you, because touch can be a really big issue. Typically for PTSD is one of the most common ones, but certain anxiety as well, just feeling like people are too close, or there's the crowd is kind of closing in on you. You can have them provide that physical bubble that can be really beneficial. Alerting on psychiatric things. So if you're doing something that is a typically bad behavior for you, or something that you want them to interrupt, you can teach behavior interruption. So if you like chew on your skin, you scratch yourself until you have injury, pulling out hair, biting nails is kind of like a minor one, but some people will bite their fingers until there's like not much left. Just a bunch of different things, so you can train them to interrupt those kind of bad behavior. I'm saying bad, relative, but just unhealthy behaviors that you're doing. Sometimes for autism, things like rocking or stimming behaviors, you want them to interrupt that and do an alternative behavior that is better suited for whatever the situation, to kind of help you transition to healthier behaviors. So those are the main ones that I wanted to address, and just kind of give an idea of the different options of, like, if you see a service animal, what could they be doing for somebody? And there are so many even beyond that I haven't, that are uncommon, but that just gives you kind of an idea if you didn't know what all service animals could be used for. Those are some of the big categories.